Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell, and welcome to another episode of Thrive, the show where we dive into the strategies, discuss the steps, everything that you need to know to turn all of this uncertainty into your competitive advantage. We've got a really special show for you today, so I want to go ahead and dive in to the topics that we're going to cover to really help you emerge successful. Let's get started. All right, welcome back again to Thrive. Now, my special guest today is none other than public speaking, communications expert, and guru, Allison Shapira. Welcome to the show, Allison.
Thank you, Meredith. I am thrilled to be with you again.
And you are coming to us today from beautiful Annapolis, Maryland. Have you been able to do any sailing, or has it been a little too cold up there?
Yes, it's been a little cold, and yes, I've done a little bit of sailing, and it's getting warmer and warmer, which is great. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful day.
Nice, nice, nice. All right. We only have about 25 minutes. I want to get into the meat of this discussion. But before we dive in, we've been lucky enough to have you here on this show before. But for anybody who didn't happen to catch that show, tell us a little bit about you, the work you do. And I'm really curious, how did you go into the areas of public speaking and communication? And why was that a magnet and a draw for you?
I am a former opera singer turned entrepreneur. So my introduction to communication and public speaking came through being a performer, performing on stage and learning how to connect with an audience using my voice. So when I left that field and went into diplomacy and later communication and speech writing, I realized everything I learned as a singer made me very comfortable on stage and an even better coach of others. So then I had to learn a little bit more about the content creation, because opera singers don't technically or don't usually write what they're performing. They perform other people's material. So I learned about the messaging, influence, and persuasion, and then was able to launch my own company teaching public speaking and presentation skills using the musical techniques I had learned, applying them in a business setting, and then helping people grow throughout their careers by using their voice in order to have a positive impact on others.
Well, I think that's fantastic. Communication, it's funny, I'm a strategic planner by training. I do a lot of strategic plans. And whenever we start the strategic planning process, we always interview people, getting a feel for people, telling us, what do you want? What do you want the company to focus on? What are your thoughts and ideas? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest opportunities you see? I have never, ever done a strategic plan where communication didn't come up as an issue. And I feel like it's one of those watered down words when it comes to business. But why is how we present, why is public speaking, why is communication so important?
It's so interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember a professor of mine saying, if it's such a soft skill, why is it so hard to learn?
Great, great.
And it is. I'm so happy to hear you say that communication is part of the strategic planning process, because anyone who's worked in the field of communication knows how frustrating it is when somebody else comes up with the strategy and then gives it to the communication person to communicate and distribute. And it doesn't work that way, because what we choose to communicate comes from the strategy, and the strategy depends on every other element of the business, of the operations, the management, the messaging, everything. So communication has to be an integral part of the strategy if we want to be successful when we're actually communicating a message. And it's important because everything we do is benefited by the way in which we communicate. So our ability to connect with people, to influence them, to relate to them, to build trust with them is a reflection of how we communicate with them. So it's a critical link in anything that we're planning when we're here and our audience is here, whether we're managing them or pitching to them. That link that connects us successfully is our communication.
So So, this whole premise of this show is based on uncertainty. Really, if I have a mission, I want people to flip the script on uncertainty rather than fear it. I want them to see the opportunity in it. So, when it comes to presenting, public speaking, communications, what are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing your clients and or just people in general suffering from when it comes to this hard skill of learning to communicate effectively?
As I'm sure you know, because you've been talking about this topic for years. I mean, this is something that's your expertise, your area of focus. Uncertainty is not new. It's not something that happened this past year and hasn't happened before. It's a phenomenon that we're always facing in the marketplace with clients, with competition. So the idea that we have to adapt this year in the face of uncertainty isn't new. What's new is that it's applying to everyone around the world concurrently. But communicating through uncertainty is a skill set that we've needed throughout our lives. And I think about a particular professor of mine, Professor Heifetz from the Harvard Kennedy School, who talks about 3 different ways to communicate with confidence in the face of uncertainty. And the first is you can take a stand when you have the information to do so. I believe we should do this. That can be hard when in the face of uncertainty, when we don't have complete information. Second and third ways are we can take a stand to talk about the complexity of an issue. So we don't have complete information, but we can confidently talk about the fact that we don't have complete information and still be confident in our message. And then the third way is to talk about the process we're using to get more information. So I love that as a framework for thinking about how can we communicate with confidence, even in the face of uncertainty.
I've always felt that one reason communication always comes up as a problem in companies is the fact that we tend to think about communicating as how we talk to people rather than really viewing communication as a two-way street. And I know that you and I are keynote speakers, we're presenters. And even in the presentation, it isn't all about what I do from stage, but also people hear me better when I engage them in the process. Can you talk a little bit about that? And if you see that as a challenge and something that leaders need to work and focus on?
It's such an important point because leaders tend to have this assumption, or there's this outdated assumption among leaders that we have to have all the information, we have to have all the answers, and then we neatly and confidently deliver it to the people that we're leading. And that doesn't ensure buy-in, that doesn't ensure that we have the right information to communicate. So as someone who's been teaching this topic for 18 years and comes at this from the perspective of an educator, a trainer, someone who's looking to build skills in others as opposed to simply deliver knowledge, I know that the more other people are brought into the conversation, the more engaged they are, the more focused they are, the more they retain whatever it is you're talking about, and the more you can get more accurate information and a better different pieces of the puzzle that you as the leader can't always see. So sometimes, and it's really interesting when I'll be working with someone who has to deliver a difficult message to their audience, instead of crafting this 30-minute speech to deliver this message, instead I'll work with them and craft a 5-minute conversation starter where they outline the challenge, they outline the issues, and then they open it up for a discussion with their team, with the people that they're leading. And then it's a more productive conversation, even if you come to the same conclusions that you as the leader would have come to at the end of the conversation. Because the people you're communicating with were part of the process, then they have much more ownership of the solution.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is so key in times of uncertainty. As we are researching uncertainty, one of the things that people want in the middle of uncertainty is control. It's the thing we can't give anybody because you have no idea what's going to happen. So the next best thing to come behind control is a voice, to be heard. right? And it was really fascinating to me that the moment that you take guarantee off the table, and if you own a business right now, even if you have people who work part-time for you, people who work full-time for you, you really need to hear the fact that even if you're telling people the company's okay, we're going to be fine, they don't really believe you because it's just too uncertain, and quite frankly you can't guarantee anybody anything, so they want to be heard. But the biggest challenge you have in the middle of uncertainty is you want to control your own business. My gosh, everything's on the line, right? I don't want to possibly throw this out for discussion. What are some ways that you help leaders begin to understand the importance of engaging? And what are some small, even baby steps they can take to get a little more comfortable with the process?
The first baby step that I ask leaders to take is to talk to people on their teams before they communicate a message. To
Oh,
figure out, talk to people, think about the allies that you have within your organization. Maybe it's someone who's a direct report, maybe it's two down. Who are the people who aren't afraid to give you honest, authentic feedback? And even try out your messaging in advance to see what you're working, to see how that message is going to be received. I remember one senior executive I was working with was talking about, she was crafting this speech, and she said to her team, I want to make sure I'm not stepping on a rake before when I give this speech. So it's figuring out, where's the rake hiding in the grass so I don't step on it and have it swing up and hit me in the face. So often we only listen to the people in our immediate circle as opposed to people who may be closest to the issues that we're trying to solve. So the first step is to listen to other people. Then as you formulate your message, to put yourself in their shoes, in the shoes of the different people in your audience, to get a sense of how are they feeling? How can you validate their feelings? And then when you do communicate with them, can you tap into a sense of shared values that everyone can relate to? So you can say, we don't know what the answer is, but I know that every single person on this team demonstrates resilience. And as long as we're resilient, we're going to get through this. And that's how you can connect with and motivate people, even though you don't know what the future is going to bring.
I love the example that you just gave because it really shows transparency. And that's another piece that I want to talk about in communication is that, there you are at the helm, and let's assume you're not looking at a bright future. How open and honest should you be? And at the same time, how do you do that without scaring your employees?
Mhm. It's a critical question. It's different for every business. It's different for every company because it depends on the dynamics within your organization. So I will tell you, for example, when I had to communicate to my team about how we were going to make it through the beginning of the pandemic, when 95% of our business and estimated revenue disappeared, it was tough. And
Yeah.
and I communicated to my team, this is a challenge, but I know we're going to get through it. I have a healthy reserve that I'm going to tap into. So I let them know that I had whatever I could do to control, that I was doing whatever I could to control the environment so that they would have a safe, comfortable work environment where they didn't have to worry that their job was in question. Did I specifically tell them about how close we came to depleting that operational reserve? No, unnecessary. Also unnecessary was for them to know that if I needed to, I would tap into my personal savings in order to keep their jobs. They didn't need that to know that. That was a commitment that I made to them. So it really depends on what you know is on your employee's mind, what you can say that you know will help them, and what information you think is not going to be an effective topic for them to worry about. What can you take away from their list of worries? And that's the rubric that I use to decide what do we share and when.
So, how does somebody begin to, if you're one of those people who isn't great at communication, where do you start? What are some of the systems and processes or skills and techniques? What can you do to learn to get better at presenting, better at public speaking, better at communicating?
There's a great book that I recommend, written by somebody I know very well, called Speak with Impact. I have that book behind me right here.
It's a great book, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm It's such an important question because after nearly 20 years of teaching public speaking, I have come to believe without a shadow of a doubt, or I think that's beyond a shadow of a doubt, that public speaking is a skill. It is
Yes.
not a talent. It's not something that we're simply born with. It's something every single one of us gets better at with practice and feedback. So whether it's reading a book, taking a course, getting one-on-one coaching, there are very specific skills we can take to build our persuasiveness, to build our messaging skills, to build our concise speaking skills, and then to build our delivery skills in terms of our body language and vocal variety and our presence. Our executive presence is also a series of skills. So the first step is to recognize every single component of our communication we can build as a skill, as opposed to simply writing off if we're not good at it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I've had the gift of gab ever since I was a young child, and kind of like you, certainly not an opera singer, but I was never afraid of performing. But I look back at the early years when I began speaking and presenting, and I think, what a disaster compared to where I am now. And that takes, and even now I invest in taking classes. I watch a lot of other people speak to basically continue to hone my skills. So would you agree you never master it?
Absolutely. It's something that we're constantly building. I'm watching videos of myself speaking, giving myself feedback, asking people for feedback. And after every single speech or training or keynote, I always do a debrief. What worked? What didn't work? What am I going to do differently next time? And so the idea is every single time I speak, I'm better than the time before because of the feedback I've received or given myself and then integrated. So it's a skill that we keep building. Just as if we were to go to the gym and work out and build muscles, we would look great in the moment. And then if we never went back to the gym, those muscles would get flabby and we wouldn't be as effective. So it's a skill we have to continuously build.
So as we look into 2021, it was that yesterday I had been in Greenville, South Carolina working, and I was driving home, and my publisher called me. I'm getting ready to publish this new book, and he called me and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually looking for gasoline." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry if you're watching the recorded, we're recording this at a time when the pipeline has been just came back working again, I understand, but we've got a gas shortage here in the Southeast." And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, "Well, I would be upset about it if I hadn't just written a book about uncertainty." I said, "All these things are sort of working for me." And he laughed, but it is true. I mean, we all thought we would wake up in 2020 and 2021 and 2020 would be behind us. But here we start into 2021, and oh my gosh, it's just insane. I mean, like I said, this week we've had, the gas issues. We've had, will there be a second wave? I mean, will we have inflation? What's going to happen with taxes? What states are opening? What states aren't opening? Will you wear a mask? Will you not wear a mask? What can you do if not everybody's vaccinated? So as we look into 2021 and you're working with leaders, what types of things should you be communicating, talking about, or working on in order to make sure that your team is informed as we move through 2021, but not so weighed down in the overwhelm of, of so much change and uncertainty happening that you almost can't move into it?
It's important to think about the way in which we're communicating with people. And I'm also going to make sure for a second that you can hear my audio, because all of a sudden I'm hearing some background.
Nope, we've got you perfectly, no background.
Perfect, then I'll keep going. It's important to think about the frequency in which we're communicating to people and then the amount of information we're conveying at any given moment. So especially when we talk about uncertainty and an enormous amount of uncertainty, we can't simply send these long, lengthy emails communicating about everything at once because it's going to overwhelm people and they won't know actionable steps to take. So I like to recommend more frequent, shorter communications, whether it's verbally delivered or written, and then within each communication having some sort of action item or next step. Because you're right, when we have a sense of control, we feel more comfortable. And while we can't control the big picture, we can control the steps that we're taking every single day. And so to help people realize what is in their control, those micro steps they can take, is then going to make them more comfortable. And then that frequency of communication is going to make them feel like you've got their best interests at heart. You're thinking about them, you're giving them these tools. And I believe that that creates a greater feeling of trust and connection within an organization.
Is presenting virtually that much different?
Yes.
Yes. And how so?
It's different for us as the speaker because the feedback that we get is different. If we were in person, I could sense the energy in the room in a second. I can walk into a room or enter a room and feel if people are happy, sad, frustrated, busy, and then I can adapt. And over the course of a communication, a speech, a presentation, I can see people's expressions and then change accordingly. In a virtual setting, I'm looking directly into a camera lens, which means I'm not getting the energy back. I can pause and I can look down at the screen, and maybe people are on video if it's a small enough group, but then that delayed feedback loop between me pausing, looking down, getting the feedback, incorporating it, looking back into the camera lens is extremely fatiguing, which is why it's so tiring to be on video all of the time. So there's that different way in which we're connecting with people. And what I've learned over a year plus of doing this exclusively is that just because I can't feel the energy doesn't mean it's not there. I just don't get the benefit of seeing it. So I have to look for other tools to validate it. And maybe it's in the chat asking people to respond. Maybe it's pausing and opening it up for questions. Maybe it's talking with someone afterwards and asking them for feedback. But the ways in which we gauge the effectiveness of a presentation, those tools have changed. And as a result, how we feel presenting has changed. And we need to look for other tools in order to gauge our effectiveness.
It is hard to believe, but we are basically at the end of this podcast. I have two questions I want to close out with, and I'm fine with you answering them either way. How do people find out more about you, more about your book, and more about what they need to be doing to really sell or speak with impact? And the second is, as you look at 2021, what is your biggest piece of advice? What's the biggest thing you find yourself telling your clients about what they need to be successful as they move through this year?
And is it specifically around communication?
No, absolutely not.
No. Okay. The first answer to your first question, find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. Visit my website at allisonshapira.com, where you can watch videos, receive public speaking tips, and also download a chapter of my book. In terms of what I recommend as we look at 2021, none of us does this alone. None of us is going through this year alone. And so to try to do it ourselves is not only impractical, it's impossible. So recognize that so many people out there, whether it's your team, a coach, a mentor, a family member, everyone has their own piece of this puzzle. And the more people you connect with, the more together we can put this puzzle together and all of a sudden see the bigger picture and be able to get through to whatever is on the other side. And it's going to be positive because we're going to build it in a positive way. So don't do this alone. Find other people to reinforce your energy and help you see a clearer vision. And then it's going to be a much more impactful year.
Oh, I love that. I love this idea of one of our strategies in our 9-step formula for thriving in uncertainty is that competition becomes collaboration. And it's so true. In uncertain times, the challenges are too big for one person, one industry, one company to solve. You need to be looking for ways to work together. So I love that advice. And please, please go to AllisonShapira.com, connect with her on LinkedIn, get a free chapter of that book. You are going to be so glad that you did. Allison, I want to thank you again for joining us today. And thank you for your time, your wisdom, and your input. And thank you again to our audience for joining us for another episode of Thriving in Uncertainty. We'll see you next week with another guest, another set of strategies, and another set of ideas that you need to turn all of this uncertainty into your competitive advantage. Thank you.